Hey, Austin. Austin, are you there?
Yes.
Cool. Are you
Just
ready?
joined.
Okay. Are you ready to do a demo today?
Yes, I am.
Excellent. Cool. I think you're up first.
Okay, how much time do I have, by the way?
Excellent question. Is it possible for you to keep it to like 15 minutes, or is that not enough time?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I could try.
Okay, if you run over, it's not a big deal.
Okay, just feel free to ping me if I'm losing track of the time and tell me to move it along. That's fine.
Okay. Okay, sounds good. Thank you. Actually, why don't you go ahead and try to share your screen now, just to make sure we get that working.
Okay, will you give me 1 sec? I was just going to go grab a glass of water.
Yeah, sure, of course.
I'll be back in 1 minute.
Okay.
Oh, hey Doug. Hey, is Austin presenting today?
Yes, he is.
Alrighty. And he's presenting the serverless framework?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. That's probably kind of a silly question, actually.
He's going to talk about IaaS, you know.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm back and I'm going to try sharing my screen now.
All right, cool. All right, I can see your desktop.
Okay. What are you looking at right now? Are there slides?
Yep, you're scrolling through them quickly, yep.
Perfect.
Yep, thank you very much. So while we're waiting, people may want to add their names to the attendee list on the agenda. Actually, they paste a link to the agenda doc. There's the link.
Was that Doug Davis?
Yes, it was. How's it going, Rob?
I'm extremely tired as my wife gave birth to twins about 10 days ago.
Woohoo, congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you much. So I'm not supposed to be in the office until next week, but I figured I would dial in because this just seems to be a pretty exciting place to be.
This is the happening place. I agree, yes.
Nice, nice. Would you, while people are waiting for folks, would you mind kind of catching me up as what's been going on the last 2 or 3 weeks?
Yeah, so basically been focused on trying to finish up the white paper itself. I think the main focus of the changes have really been on sort of abstracting it more, making it a little less container-centric for the most part, and trying to get a crisper definition of, say, serverless versus FAS. I think that's probably been the biggest thing.
Cool. And most of the work has been focused on the white paper?
Yeah, well, pretty much all the work, yeah. So let's see. We can deal with just 1 more minute. 9:04 my time will start. Okay, just a heads up.
Hey guys, I was on the wrong bridge. Sorry about that.
Hey, Ken.
Hey.
Just let you guys know, according to my Zoom, we are actually recording. So if you don't like that, you may want to leave. But otherwise, you'll be recorded for all time.
I don't see Chris. Is he on?
No, I think he's on a plane right now. So it's
Stuck in traffic, according to Twitter.
oh
But he is going in on a plane. Yeah, he's not going to join us.
yeah. All right. So hold on.
Hey, Ken, did I see something recently that your corporate affiliation changed?
Yes, I'm at MasterCard now.
Congratulations.
Thanks.
My oldest credit card I've had is a MasterCard, so not sure how you're involved in that, but thank you for your work.
Send all the bills to him.
Yeah, if there's a friends and family discount you get, I'm all ears.
I'll let you know. I'll see if I can figure out something there.
All right. Why don't we go ahead and get started? 9:05. Let me actually repaste the agenda link into the chat so people can see that if they don't have it. Up first, we have Austin's going to present a quick demo of the serverless framework, I believe is what it's called. So, Austin, you want to go ahead and share your screen again and then walk us through that?
Sure thing.
All right. All right, looks good.
It's working?
Yep, all set.
Okay. I've got about 15 minutes here, and I'm just going to try and race through this pretty quickly. Kind of a lot of stuff to cover. But good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. I'm Austin Collins, the founder and CEO of Serverless, Inc. We make tools and infrastructure to help developers and teams build serverless applications. We're founded in 2015. There's about 15 of us. Half of us are in San Francisco. The other half are distributed. Serverless.com is our domain. Go Serverless is our Twitter handle. And we got started with the serverless framework. This was our big project, in which the project we built our company off of. We built this in 2015 in the very, very early days of Lambda. When Lambda was, just recently announced, and there was some excitement about it, but it was very limited, and people didn't really see the potential, at least not as much as we did, because we were instantly huge fans, and we were going around trying to tell everyone, oh, this compute service, this auto-scaling, pay-per-execution, event-driven microservice compute platform is going to change everything. You could build all types of traditional applications on it, as well as new, neat event-driven automation. And we were trying to go around and spread that message to little success. We weren't met with the same amount of excitement as what we had. So we went out and built something called the Serverless Framework, which was it's an application framework to help people build applications entirely on Lambda, and now Azure Functions, Google Cloud Functions, and a lot of other serverless compute providers. And this project was instantly very well received. I think it was the missing accessibility story for Lambda and how to use serverless compute in general in the context of applications. And I think it provided that developer experience that was missing for that great technology. So yeah, we've been working on that since about 2015. In addition, we're working on something called the Serverless Application Platform now. And this application platform has 3 components. There's the framework, our original project. There's a new component. This is our first piece of infrastructure that we're offering. It's called the Event Gateway, and it is a very sophisticated event router. Basically, gets data in the form of events to functions as a service located everywhere. And lastly, there's a dashboard product that we're coming out with soon. We're going to offer this platform hosted, and you're also going to be able to install it wherever you'd like. So I'll quickly go over the framework for those of you who aren't familiar with it. It's simply a command line interface written in Node.js. And it's all about developer experience. This was our big goal with the serverless framework. And our mantra in the early days was, hey, if you have to go look at the Amazon dashboard, then we failed. We want everyone to be able to just do everything in the command line. We've been pretty successful with that so far. So you just simply install it with npm. You could create a template in a variety of different languages and deploy something with relative ease and have some type of outcome or end result within a few minutes. I think the big reason why the serverless framework became so successful was because when you look at what a serverless architecture is on Amazon, it is like all these functions, all these granular pieces connected to lots of other infrastructure pieces. And it's a bit chaotic, especially if you're a newcomer trying to figure out what this architectural pattern is all about. It's very spaghetti-ish in nature. And because all the pieces are so small and you end up with a whole bunch of them, it just gets more complicated. So what the serverless framework does really well is that it offers an application model. This abstract application experience. And this is the way we think of it in simplest terms right here on the left. There's just event sources, and you create subscriptions between those event sources, and functions as a service or serverless compute functions. And we express this in our serverless framework in the least amount of configuration. And this is the most helpful in helping people get into serverless and start using Lambda and Cloud Functions and Azure Functions. And this story is really just, we say it's a story of functions and events. In your configuration file, you simply list out the functions that you have or that you want to deploy. And then each function has a events property where it's just an array of events that will go and trigger that function. So very minimal config. You could build a REST API with the serverless framework in probably 8-9 lines of configuration. And it's a simple abstract story to cover up the messiness that is the serverless architecture underneath. The other thing we do, of course, is application lifecycle management for your serverless application. Everything from creating it to running it locally. We offer a great local experience, which is a huge pain point in serverless architectures in general. Deployment is very easy and safe. You can invoke it pretty easily through our command line, see logs, roll back functions, roll back your entire application and remove it. There's a ton of stuff we offer just in the CLI. And I think we do this pretty well. We try and bake in all the best practices that we've learned over the years, right into this automation. The use cases that we see with the serverless framework, number one, backends, APIs, number two, data processing, number three, kind of random event-driven automation. And overall, there's just a ton of stuff people have built with this framework. It is incredible. Every single day we see someone trying to fit some odd job into a Lambda function and make it work. And it's pretty fascinating. I think once you have a compute service that is this convenient, it really brings all users and use cases to the table. Because at the end of the day, these qualities, the zero administration, auto scaling, paper execution, these qualities are addictive, and we see people trying to make as much stuff as they can with it using our framework. So some examples of that over here on the left. We're multi-language and multi-provider now. So we offer lots of different languages, Java, Python, Node, and we have, I think, eight or nine different provider plugins now. So you could really deploy serverless functions all over the place. And our goal is to continually to offer a uniform experience for writing your functions one way and deploying them to multiple providers. We've done a pretty good job of that in serverless framework version 1. Although it's been a challenge at the same time because the landscape has moved so fast, and it's just hard to build that perfect abstraction on top of this rate of innovation. But we have a lot of work planned for this, a lot of stuff coming, and we're going to do this a lot better in the very near future here. Many plugins. We have a fantastic community. They've authored all types of plugins to help you do pretty much anything you can imagine, from like storing secrets to creating an even better local experience. There's hundreds of these plugins. Lastly, we just hit 19,000 stars on GitHub in a couple of years. I think that's pretty good. I think we're definitely one of the fastest growing open source projects out there. We have a ton of enterprise users. All the work we've done to bake in best practices and focus on providing a safe serverless application lifecycle management experience has really appealed to the enterprise, especially now because all we hear these days is serverless first. a lot of these companies that come to us, they say, look, time to market, reducing operational overhead and expenditures, these are our number one priorities. And we've done some proof of concepts, and we think the serverless architecture is the best way to accomplish these goals. And we want to try and do as much new stuff in a serverless fashion as possible. And we see them go through great lengths to try and make it work in a serverless architecture. And the serverless architecture certainly has some limitations, but a lot of these users will try and work around these limitations as much as possible, just to take advantage of those underlying qualities. And only when they can't get around these limitations, then we see them starting to fall back on other technologies. But yeah, the framework has been great for enterprise in general because it really helps them operationalize serverless development. It's a great tool for spreading across your developer teams and giving them some safe guidelines so that they do so they use best practices when they're building these applications. And largely, I think we're a focal point of the serverless movement. I think we definitely had something to do with a lot of this activity, and hopefully I think we're a big inspiration for it. And if you ever want to see serverless trends, what's happening in this movement in this community, our GitHub repo, all of our open source projects are just a great place to observe all that. The Event Gateway is our new project. I'm going to actually do a demo of it if time permits. It is a highly productive event router for functions as a service, and productivity is just the key theme that we focused on with this Event Gateway. First off, it is simply an HTTP server, and you could send all type of data to it, but it always expresses data in the form of events. Right now, it just accepts requests via HTTP. And whatever, depending on the shape of your HTTP request, it'll express it as an event, no matter what. So you could send any custom data you want into the Event Gateway, and it'll express it as an event, or you could send in actually structured event schemas into the Event Gateway, and it'll just take that event and use it. The second thing it does is it routes events to all functions as a service. Right now we support Lambda, we support Azure Functions, Google Cloud Functions, but we have a lot of other providers that we plan to support in the near future. And it has a very flexible design. We've spent a lot of time looking at the serverless architecture and trying to identify the key pain points, and a lot of these pain points can be categorized generally under there's just a lot of infrastructure components in this architecture. And it started to get us thinking, along the lines of, can we build a new piece of infrastructure that seeks to abstract a lot of these other types of infrastructure at a higher level? And so that you can actually focus on less infrastructure as a result, because this is one of the cultural tenets of the serverless movement in general. So this Event Gateway seeks to do just that. So it's both a pub sub as well as an API gateway. And then it's going to expand into a few other areas in the future as well. But basically, you can use this to expose API endpoints, and all HTTP requests coming in will be expressed as HTTP events. You could send in structured event schemas in a pub sub fashion directly to it. And it's also going to have a lot of integrations built in with third-party SaaS providers and other tooling and infrastructure.
Does it have to be a bump in the wire, or you have a mechanism for sort of, not making it on the wire path? Especially for high-performance applications, someone wants to feed into a Kafka stream, doesn't want to go through an HTTP gateway in between. Yeah,
we have a lot of support. We have a lot of other features planned for that in the future. Right now, we did just want to focus on HTTP at this time because our community is very HTTP focused. So in the future, we'd like to offer people some other ways of doing that, but right now we're just focused on this. Also, if you have other questions, I think a few members of our team are here in the chat room. Feel free to write them. They should be.
So I have a couple of questions. First, you showed the YAML, and I've also looked at it in the past. They sort of associate a function with an event, and I would sort of look at the problem from a different perspective. As an event needs to be pushed into a function, not necessarily the function consumes an event. Like, most programming paradigm, you go to an S3, you're saying, which function do I want to trigger when something happens? You don't necessarily go to the function and say, where do I want to get, because one of the things that could happen is that you want to change the function that serves that event, or the version, for example, from production to beta, the other way around. So what do you think about that? Is that the right abstraction where the event is coupled with the function and not sort of as a standalone mapping?
Yeah, we have a few thoughts on that. Actually, we're investigating a few different ways. I mean, we've had pretty large success with our current abstraction, and the other thing that this event gateway does, though, is that you can actually you can use it to invoke functions anywhere and just send simple parameters to functions. So that the functions aren't actually tied to event schemas. So we're investigating a couple different ways. We're kind of moving forward with our first abstraction just because we've gotten a lot of momentum with it. But it's something we're continuing to experiment with. And I'm gonna race through the rest of the presentation real quick because I've only got 15 minutes. And then I think we should definitely have a longer chat. But in the meantime, if you have any other questions, just enter them right into the chat box. So again, Event Gateway, a big goal was just to simplify the serverless architecture in general. These are the things that we sought to make easier or to eventually replace with a single piece of infrastructure. That is API gateway, so your pub subsystem, some type of streaming data system, and this is what we're going for in the long run. And lastly, a big goal of ours was just to decouple logic and decouple teams. Microservices, serverless functions as a service, they have great potential to help teams move with more autonomy. To allow them to push things into production without affecting the system as a whole and not be blocked as much. And the event-driven kind of design really helps this a lot, actually, especially just the pub sub model. So we're trying to use that to allow teams to author functions and own them and be able to push them into production without affecting anything else. So. Because right now, one of the big problems that we saw were, you could have serverless functions and they're independent units of deployment, and that offers a lot of autonomy. But there are still a lot of other infrastructure dependencies that were shared that would still result in blocking situations, particularly like an API gateway and Amazon's API gateway. The design of it is such that someone has to kind of be in control of the API gateway. And if you want to push stuff into production, you have to ping that person and say, hey, can we deploy this on the API right now? And that gets complicated if you're a big team all working on this same backend. But with the way the event gateway is designed, you don't run into that situation. There's no big shared resource. There's just simply pub sub subscriptions. What's next for us? We're releasing our serverless platform. It includes a hosted version of the event gateway, along with a lot of other interesting team collaboration features. And we're very, very interested in serverless application function and event standards. This is something we've been working on for a long time. When we look at what our community wants, they want access to everything. They want to be able to use any platform, any provider, and any other managed service on those providers to best solve their problem. So a common request for us is, hey, we're using Amazon Lambda and we're using Amazon in general because everybody's using Amazon, but we really want to use Google's machine learning stuff. Is there a way we could stick some Google Cloud functions over there and have all these functions kind of work together in some type of consolidated serverless architecture? And that is very much of interest to us because we don't view the serverless architecture as a provider-specific architecture. We view it as something that is inherently multi-provider and even hybrid cloud. And standardization is the missing piece here that's going to help with a lot of that. So if I have a few minutes left, I'll quickly do a quick run through or a quick demo of our event gateway. Let me look at the time here. Maybe I could do this in about 5 minutes. Let's see. We have a event gateway example project. The event gateway can be run locally. It works really nicely locally thanks to the serverless framework. There's a great built-in integration there. I have a serverless web application that I'm looking at now. It has a front end. It also has a back end that is entirely serverless. And the back end is comprised of a few different serverless services. And each one of these is simply like a project that has different functions in it. So I could open up the users service here, and this is just a serverless framework configuration file. You'll see that there's one function in here that's listing on an HTTP event. If I go over here, I have the front end of that example app up and running. It's just a simple web app with a sign-up form, and the web app is just talking about how cool serverless applications are, of course. And over here, I'm in the Event Gateway example project. I'll quickly CD into the services, and you can see all these different groupings of functions in this project here. I'm going to CD into the template service, which actually doesn't have any functions, but I'm going to do this. I'm going to start with this because we just want to observe real quick events actually going into the gateway. So Serverless Framework has a great new command called serverless run. It's going to emulate both the event gateway as well as all your serverless functions across cloud providers locally. I just initialized it right here, and it's all connected to this front-end application. So as soon as I start making HTTP requests, you can see them start to show up here in my terminal. So every HTTP request by default, if it does not include a special header, is expressed as an HTTP event, and that's what we see here. Yeah, you could see headers, query parameters, the body, all that stuff. Now, one very cool thing about all this is that we have all these different projects with different groupings of functions, and the way that the serverless framework is designed is such that you can go in and actually add all these functions to your local session. So I just logged in, I just CD'd into that users project, which had one function, and I ran serverless run, and that actually added it to my existing running session here. So you can see function users register was loaded. The event gateway also registered that function and created a subscription for it to the HTTP event. Let me clear this real quick. I'm going to enter my email address here and hit register. Now, something a little different happened. The HTTP event came in. We can see the body of it. We can see my email address right here. And then it triggered, then the serverless framework triggered this function via HTTP request and started running the function. And that function actually then emitted another event back into the event gateway. So as I was talking about before, in the event gateway, you could receive HTTP requests. So it functions like your API gateway, but you could also send structured data into it as well to use it as a pub sub. And in the actual code of this users register function, we register a user right here, and then we emit a user registered event. So all in this single flow, using like this one piece of infrastructure, we received a HTTP request, processed a function, emulated the AWS Lambda function locally, and within that function, we also sent another event back into the event gateway. And you can see all that listed out right here. Now, and what this is basically the beginning of an event-driven workflow. And I could log into a few other services to start building onto this event-driven workflow. So for example, I have an emails service here, which has one function that reacts to the user registered event and sends the person a welcome email. So I just added that to my session. You can see the send welcome email function was added to my session and a subscription was created for it on the event gateway. I'll run through the process one more time. Again, here's the HTTP event that came in. It triggered the user's register function. That then sent out another event back into the event gateway. That event then triggered the send welcome email function. So this is the beginning of a larger event-driven workflow. And the cool thing is, what you don't get with the serverless architecture, as we know it right now, is this awesome local experience. where you could kind of gradually introduce pieces of logic into it to start working with those, all locally, of course. This has a few other neat features. Once the user session has been created, we actually incorporated our SDK into the front end of this web application. And we built it right into React. So if you know React and you know Redux, these are event-driven front-end frameworks. And there's a lot of conceptual consistency with what we're trying to achieve with the event gateway. So we put our SDK right into Redux, and we're actually able to tap into all client-side events that are happening and selectively send those to the event gateway. So when a user session is created, this app is actually set up to start receiving user activity events whenever the user is going around and doing something on the front end of the application. And these events are being sent to the event gateway. You can set up serverless functions, do all types of things with this to create like a personalized experience for your user, to just like save analytics, anything like that. And the last piece of functionality I'll show off here is I'm going to bring in a CRM function. And this is designed to react to a user-created event. It's going to simply add the user to a CRM system. However, the great thing about this function is that it does not work. It's totally broken. And the event gateway is entirely event-driven. That was our theme to begin with, and we wanted to be consistent with that theme. So we actually, so in the event gateway, we express all logs as events as well. So anything that happens with the system of the event gateway, or errors whenever it's trying to reach out to a function, if there's a problem there, it expresses it in the form of an event. So you can actually write functions to react to system issues. So I've added in the CRM function, and it does not work, and we'll see that in a second. But I'm also going to add in a error handler function as well. And I'll run through this whole flow right here. It's going to get a little verbose, but we could see everything happening in somewhat of a linear order here. So I clicked register. The HTTP event hit the event gateway locally. That triggered the user's register function. Within that user's register function, another event was emitted. That was the user's registered event. This triggered that send welcome email. And it also triggered the add user to CRM function. However, that function failed due to an error. And thanks to our awesome local emulation experience, you could see the errors pop up right here. And then the event gateway threw a gateway info function error event. And we actually set another function to listen to this. And this function was then triggered. And it simply sends an email alert to the admin of the system saying that something is wrong with this function. You should check it out. But you can imagine all the use cases that come from this. We love cloud native, we love serverless. And at the end of the day, things do happen on these underlying cloud providers. And this gives you a dead simple way of reacting to problems like what happens if S3 goes down or AWS Lambda goes down. What do you do in that case? Maybe you react to it with a function that recreates the subscription to point to a different function on a different region, or why not point to a function on a different provider? The event gateway supports cloud functions, Azure functions, and a lot more, so you have that flexibility. But yeah, that's it. That's my overview of everything. What we're looking at today, I think, is version 0.1 of the serverless architecture and the application experience that's being built around it. And in the very near future, we have a ton of stuff coming out to improve this workflow, improve the developer experience, improve the amount of use cases that people are going to be able to do with all this great new technology. So please look out for it. If you have any questions, you can reach out to me. I'm Austin, AUSTEN, @serverless.com, or any of our team members. We're all pretty open and ready to talk about this stuff because we love it. Anyway, that's it on my end.
All right, cool. Thank you, Austin. That looks really, really cool. Normally, I would ask if there are any questions, but unfortunately, I do want to make sure we don't run out of time today. So, as he said, do reach out to Austin through email or the team. Also, as he mentioned, there's a chat, so you can use that in the during the call right now. But I think we move on. Yaron, you want to talk about the event mapping proposal that you uploaded fairly recently? I'll paste a link to it in the chat. Yaron, are you there?
Yep. Do you hear me?
Yep. Can you quickly give a brief summary, maybe like 5 or 10 minutes?
Yes, sure. Let me open it for a second, and everyone can look at the. I don't need slides. We can just look at the. So after last call, I think we talked about this event challenge that the guys from Serverless.com here just went and presented, and I think they're addressing a real pain. But we may need to look at it as a bit broader scope, because, for example, when I'm generating an event from, let's say, a Kinesis stream into a Lambda function, I don't necessarily want an HTTP gateway in between. So, and one private use case could be that there is sort of an HTTP gateway in between. Let me try and open that. Now, while I worked on it, I noticed that it's not really serverless specific, so I generalized this document a bit. Well, let me just open it. Sorry for the mess. Can I share the screen? Yep. Okay, can you see my screen now?
Yes, it's a little small, but yes. Yep.
Yeah, so I'll if I zoom in a second. So I'll try and describe the problem statement in one diagram, which is the one here. Okay, essentially we have a cloud platform like Amazon or Azure or others, and they have their own sort of API gateways or brokers, and they have their serverless functions, and there may be something I'll refer to as a sort of a starter. What happens when the function is not really active? Someone needs to kick it out. And then we have consumer services. That could be, webhook. That could be a on-platform service for the cloud provider, maybe a job cron for scheduled events, or again, like a Kinesis stream or anything pushing into that. So that's the general problem. And the way I see that, it needs to be sort of mapping between one of the other. What Serverless just showed is a way where the source service goes through an event mapper into the broker. But I see many cases where we may want to have the source directly talking to the to the service or API gateway without necessarily going through yet another gateway in between. And what we need in order to standardize this, so looking at serverless.com documentation and all that, I think they're doing a great job, but you could still see that it's very cloud specific, many of the definitions. So, and also, even when you go into Amazon Lambda and you look at the structure of each event, whether it's an event coming from S3 or Dynamo or Kinesis, there's no real way from the JSON structure to figure out what was the event. You have to write the function in a way where you already upfront know what kind of event it was. Okay, so what we need to try and create maybe as a standard is a way for first defining the message that passes into the serverless function. Potentially, we can provide some definition for how do we describe this mapping in a more generic way, whether it's through a YAML file, maybe through some of the mechanisms that were just presented. Maybe, just think about Kubernetes ingress as yet another form of mapping, because you have, say, okay, here's an HTTP endpoint and it maps to those specific services. So you have those, and also Amazon has those event mapping definitions. So we may be able to generalize that. So instead of everyone going and describing that in his own proprietary way, we can define that. And also potentially the way to produce messages into a function, we could define how it's done, and potentially even put a RESTful interface, just like what we've just seen in front of those, even in front of Kafka or in front of Kinesis or any. So if you need a sort of uniform access to any service, you may take something a bit slower, but you still have this uniformity. So this is the general idea. The other thing is within the cloud platform, especially in the open source community where we build those things, we can also try and standardize those components of how the API gateway talks to the serverless function, or how we sort of ignite those functions from sort of state zero. Okay, and then I went into each one of those components within the document, and for example, and gave more details on those. You know, there are different messaging. What we've just seen right now was just this model, but I don't think that we want to sort of you know, avoid the other model, especially streaming, as we go into more and more IoT and big data being used as for serverless, especially on our use cases. And then I went into the message structure and I looked into AMQP and HTTP and everything. I said, what would be the generalized message that we can form that actually even conforms to traditional HTTP? Okay, so what does HTTP have? Have like a destination URI, you know, we may need to have some type and version, and maybe who's the region? The region may be another service, or maybe a host address or an IP address. And then we have, you know, headers and body. The body may need to be described, not necessarily, but we can just say this is a JSON body, so I know how to interpret it. And maybe if it's a structured body, you know, like a JSON file, maybe we want to have an optional schema. So for example, in an Amazon S3 event, instead of trying to figure out what's inside, maybe I can form a JSON schema or an Avro schema or something like that very easily can map to what's inside this body. So that's the general idea that, and this, by the way, all of that can map into HTTP requests. All of that maps to AMQP. Some of those advanced things could be sort of thrown into a header, just like, you know, in HTTP, content type is not necessarily you know, a separate field. It's just yet another specific header. So all the things that are beyond the body, and, you know, maybe source and origin, could be done in that way. Another important thing to think about is how do you authenticate. I think it's a critical issue. I won't dive into it right now. And so that's a general idea, is maybe if we can define this is at least the standard of how a message looks like, or how to interpret a message, that both the sender knows how to generate this message in this format and the receiver knows how to receive it. And then maybe just like what we've seen right now, a mechanism where I could just tell the service go and send this message into this endpoint, and some orchestration layer. You know, I also had details on like a workflow here that people can look at. You know, example use case, actually two use cases, one with the GitHub hook, another one with sort of a scheduling service, that you could see, you know, basically a form of mapping definition that translates into orchestration that in serverless guys case could be the actual gateway, but maybe potentially going and telling the sort of the source and the destination, you know, how to act together. You know, basically telling the source, this is your URL endpoint for the service that you requested. You know, maybe these are the credentials. You know, doing something similar on the listener side, and then you sort of established a service. Okay, so there's a lot of content here, also listed references. I don't know if you know, Microsoft has a product in that space called Events Hub. Confluent or the Kafka maintainers have something called connectors, which is also sort of the same thing around Kafka. You could feed it with one type of data and fan it out with another. So we can look at all those, and I don't know first if there is interest to try and tackle this. I know everyone is hesitant from mentioning the word standard. But I think we could form something very easy, even have a baseline implementation that people contribute to, and go from there.
Yeah, so Yaron, one of the questions I have when I was kind of glancing over this, and I apologize I didn't get a chance to look at it in depth, is from a definition point of view or abstract point of view, I think I like what I see there in terms of just defining the concepts and stuff like that. But in terms of next steps for this, do you actually see this, you know, heading down the path of defining a standard, to, you know, a standard event format and stuff like that? Or do you expect this to sort of remain a little more abstract than that?
No, so one of the things that we had in mind is that, you know, if we also are in a consensus, you know, I've been active in Linux for quite a while. No one likes the word spec, but they like the word code. So instead of writing a spec, you could just write H files and implementations. and then maybe people adopt it. And if there is a consensus from different people to adopt something, it forms a life of its own. So I think I want to take it beyond just a write-up, and we're willing to write code to starting from header files and actual implementations for that. But in general, I think this is sort of the missing piece, the way to translate from a source service to serve an endpoint, not necessarily confining you to an HTTP, because again, for high speed or for IoT, maybe I want MQTT to be the transport, maybe I want Kafka, or maybe just a database, writing records. So I don't necessarily want to confine the event hub being a bump in the wire.
Okay. Any other questions?
Makes sense, or?
Hey, you're on. This is Austin here. Yeah, as I mentioned in Slack, we reviewed the document. It looks great. Actually, I think it's a great starting point. And we have a very, very similar vision. And we've been focused on a lot of these concepts for a while. And it looks like you just shared the document with us. So we're definitely ready to start hashing it out with you and whoever else wants to participate. Building this out and getting traction, getting adoption is going to be a huge challenge. We've been working with a lot of providers on this problem for like over a year. It's going to be, it's not going to be easy, but we're very interested in heading down this path anyway to see where it leads.
Yeah, I think the nice thing is that people that don't necessarily, the market leaders and don't necessarily participate, we can always write a proxy, something that takes a standard RESTful API and maps it into their service, provided as part of the kit. And then eventually they'll say, you know what, why won't we just go and join the effort? That's why I listed, if you dive into the detail, I say you could have sort of a native API support, but also we can wrap everything in a RESTful definition, which is standard, and create sort of a REST to sort of native mapping.
Yep. Okay. Any other questions, comments?
Is there anyone else who's going to participate in this document?
I've got a couple of questions. I haven't read the doc, seeing it for the first time today, but just to make sure I'm digesting it in the right way. I think, Joran, is part of what you're describing here, part of the need for this common event, I was going to use the word standard, but this common event structure outside of what AMQP or MQTT have, is that the standards that they have are protocol specific, and so this one becomes overarching across the use cases that you're giving across those other protocols.
Yeah, I had this exchange with Alexis. You can even read the details, but I'm not trying to standardize another PubSub, and especially Alexis is sort of the originator of AMQP. It's probably a sensitive. It's not about that. It's about how do you orchestrate a service. I have a customer that says, I have something originating from this, from a GitHub, take GitHub webhook as an example. I want to consume a GitHub webhook and get it to my function, The HTTP gateway in between, or the message bus in between, is just an implementation detail from my perspective. And maybe I have higher performance requirements, so I'll probably use a stream instead of using HTTP, okay? But the real challenge that, we want to, in our platform, to support dozens of event sources. We don't have the R&D for that. Okay, so we can say, here's a asynchronous endpoint mechanism, here's an HTTP endpoint mechanism. You can do other things. But now someone wants to go and do integration with whether it's GitHub or GitLab, or there's someone that's generating stock ticker information as a service. I don't know. I want to be able to have this tie-in, between one service and another service. And this is, just go and look into Microsoft Event Hub. They have nice videos and all that. They explain the value proposition and the challenge. I think also this is exactly what we saw right now in the presentation. But I think just more focus on HTTP as a mechanism and sort of webhooks. But that's the general challenge.
Okay, two other questions. I guess the other one is, am I understanding this right, that if there is an event message structure that's defined, that something like the event router might, would it always be the application's responsibility to include this the metadata here, the event message, or would an event router or an API proxy ever inject that on the function's behalf, on the event's behalf?
So you can have some sort of a proxy, but the point is that the message doesn't necessarily have to be structured. So that's how I sort of, if you see how the message is organized, is sort of giving you don't have to do anything. Essentially, if you take an HTTP request, it evenly maps on all those things, and that will help us within the server function. You know, one thing that we have in Nucleo, I'll show it in a couple of weeks, is that the event class handler is one, and I could push an event through Kafka, Kinesis, HTTP, many other things, because it's all getting normalized into the same few methods of retrieving, like get body, get content type, etc. And you may have auxiliary interfaces to that specific class, but that means that I can develop a function once, I can test it using HTTP calls, and I want to push it into production pipeline with high-speed streaming. It's exactly the same function. I don't need to change my code. That's not the case right now with Lambda, okay? Because in Lambda, every event source defines its own event structure. So one of the ways to address that is by having this optional schema that if I know what kind of event it is and have a schema name, I know how to go and parse the body depending on the type of the event. Now it's optional. You don't necessarily have to have that thing. Another thing could be interesting is headers. You know, you have headers in HTTP, you have headers in AMQP, and maybe interesting to generalize that to other forms of messaging, because this is where you can start putting sort of metadata information, whether it's a content type or, we and Amazon have this notion of you can change into sort of like debug mode, and that increases the logging level for a lot of useful purposes. There's also a way a requirement to standardize sort of the identity mechanism. You want to pass to the function who's the originating identity. You don't necessarily need the function to authenticate it. You should trust sort of the API gateway have done, SSL or TLS and authentication and all that. But you do want to know who's the guy behind that message, or who's the source endpoint that sent you that message. So we can normalize that. Everything that's out of spec could be implemented in headers or as part of the body in the JSON structure.
Okay, so I'm going to have to call time here because we're running a little bit out of time, but I'd like to suggest is that people make comments in the document and probably maybe do a little follow-on next week after people have had a chance to actually read the doc, if that's okay. But what I really want to do now is move over to the white paper itself that we're working on. And in particular, Chris, I believe you're on the call.
I am, yes. Real quick, can they enable comments on that other document? It seems right now they are not enabled, the events document.
That'd be good.
Yeah, but I am here, yes.
Yeah, okay, Yaron, if you can add the ability to add comments, and let me paste a link to Chris's definition of serverless versus FAS into the chat room. So Chris, why don't you go ahead and walk us through your definition that you added in that doc?
Yeah, give me 1 second here, and maybe I'll try to share my screen. 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 Sorry, 1 second. Okay, do people see my screen now?
Yep, looks good.
Looks good, great. So I shared a link in the meeting group notes with this here. I'm happy to share it other places. I guess, Doug, you just posted it to everybody. This was kind of the homework that was assigned to me a couple of weeks back about coming up with a somewhat kind of, vendor neutral open definition of what serverless is. This is kind of what, again, we here at AWS think, meets kind of where we see the industry going. And I think it's broad enough to hopefully appease, most of the people that are involved here in this working group. Just as kind of an example, we at AWS actually have 4 guidelines for what is serverless. We went here with 3, and we see these 3 being shared by folks like Microsoft and Google and others. And it pretty much ties in with kind of what we see even again, folks like analysts and stuff saying what they consider serverless to be. And so, feel free to comment on here. There's already some comments kind of going on to the side here. One thing I would say is that there's definitely examples of things that come close to this, but if they don't meet kind of the guidelines of there being, no servers, containers, et cetera, to manage, no costs when idle, maybe with the exception of stateful storage costs, and then, instant scalability, they're still like not quite there yet. And so, again, that's kind of the way that I've shaped this. Again, happy for feedback, but love to know what people's thoughts are.
So this, Chris, did you pull this directly from the white paper section on this? Because I know there was a couple comments that you made in there, and I added some updates earlier this morning.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It was because I can't edit the doc directly. I was trying to figure out the best way to do it, and so I was like, I'm just going to take this one section and just basically break it out, and then let the rest of the group figure out how it could be potentially merged in. My apologies. I'm not as deep into document editing in Google Docs these days as I probably could be.
Yeah, I think you should be able to directly comment in there. It will show up as a colored text. Someone else will have to accept it, but I believe you should be able to edit it. And if not, let me know and I'll tweak your permissions.
I think, I don't know, do you need special permissions? So you see where that top right corner is, it says editing? If you get that drop down, I don't know if that gives you suggesting and it gives you viewing. So you might have, if you had suggesting on the other document and kind of plug this in, that might work.
Yeah.
Okay. I will give that a try for simplicity reasons here and see if I can merge that in here after the call.
Yeah. But I definitely like the direction of this text, and it's consistent with what I think a lot of people have talked about on the phone calls. So yeah, if we can get that added into the spec itself or into the white paper itself, I think that'd be great.
Okay. Cool.
Any other comments, questions before we move on? And thank you, Chris, very much for doing this.
One real quick thing that I did do, there were a number of bullet points that existed kind of beneath the other definition in the document that way exists today, where it was making some comparisons to PaaS and some other things. And my thought was to keep this section very concise, and then we can have kind of the immediate follow-up with how it compares to PaaS, IaaS, containers as a service, et cetera. But to attempt to keep the initial definition kind of without comparison to another topic or another type of a thing that would itself need to be defined, probably.
All right. Okay.
Cool.
Okay, let's quickly move on. We have 5 minutes left. Dan, I kind of add you to the agenda. Hopefully that's okay. I was wondering if you can give a brief update on the status of the modifications that you had been making to the body of the spec, in particular around the sort of removal or the removal of the containerization of things.
Yeah, I didn't make too much change since we discussed it last week. That it was pretty substantial changes, and basically I struck out that really controversial section and kind of took a new stab at it, and that's kind of what I think Chris has evolved the text to look like right now. The only thing, I addressed a couple of comments too that Chris had there on the side, and I think 1 or 2 other people did as well. And then the final thing I did was just add a little bit of text to the abstract about some outcomes of this. We talked a bit about the harmonization, I guess the H word, and message formats, just so that we have some linkage back to what Yaron was working on. But no substantial changes other than that this week.
Okay. Any questions or comments on that? Okay, I think what needs to happen there is a lot of people need to go through and review the doc and see if it's heading in the right direction. And in particular, Chris, I wouldn't mind if you could take a look and see if you think more work needs to be done to make it a little less container-centric.
Sorry, was that for Chris from Amazon?
Yes.
Yeah, I started looking a little bit at some of Dan's edits to this and made some comments. I definitely think it does seem to be shaping in a direction that makes it, again, less kind of tangled to the idea of it being a build upon or a comparison to container as a service.
Okay, that's great. And once you get the ability to make suggested text edits, please go ahead and try to do so to help make it more in that direction, because I think that probably would be a good thing. Okay, in the last couple of minutes here, I wanted discuss the conclusion section, even though I know we don't have a whole lot of time. But when I look at it, I think there are three main things that I sort of extracted from that. One is the potential to do something around the common event format, and you're already got a good start on that. But then we have the idea of more education, and then we have the idea of reducing overlap and increasing portability. And I think it's that last one that is probably has the most potential for future work for the CNCF. But what's a little bit unclear to me is how you reduce overlap or enable portability without getting into the standards word. And I'm trying to get my head around whether there's other things besides standards that people have in mind there. And if so, can you add text to the document with concrete suggestions or examples of things you think we can do without actually doing a standard, or whether people actually say, yeah, this really means standards, we're just not going to use that word. Because it's not quite clear to me what the concrete next step is when you say, I just want to reduce overlap. That's good, but what does that actually mean physically, right? So if we could get some people to give concrete suggestions on that, I think that'd be really, really helpful.
Yeah. The other thing I was going to bring up, Doug, is I don't know if there's any sub projects or sub components of the serverless projects out there that we want to take forward, possibly as interesting projects that would be cloud native focused. So we can then kind of take these projects into the TOC to kind of have presentations of, you know, what about this project would be interesting for the CNCF to look at bringing underneath the foundation.
That's a good one too, yeah. Hold on, maybe not sure.
I'm not sure we have any of those that we've identified yet, but like the event one might be something that would be interesting.
Hey, this is Austin here. We're interested in having that conversation. Just not sure what the process looks like and who to talk to.
Yeah, send me a note. I'm the TOC liaison, so I can help you with that.
Okay.
That sounds great. And in sort of the last 30 seconds or so, I suspect we probably do need another phone call next week. We're getting into this pattern of weekly phone calls, but I think it's actually good. Is there any objection to trying to do another call next week? All right, cool. Okay, I'll talk to Chris and check to get that phone, to get the invite sent out. And with that, I think we're at the top of the hour and we need to stop. So thank you everybody for joining. We'll talk again next week.
Great. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, bye.
Thanks, everyone.